there were two really profound times of doubt in my life. One was in high school. I was like 15 or 16. And I was doubting God's existence. I think it was a pretty normal stage of life to walk through in high school. I really struggled with, there's all these different claims to ultimate reality, and I was lucky enough to get born into the right one. So I just had I had to struggle with that. But the more profound time of doubt in my life actually came post-college. It's a newlywed. It didn't have to do with Eilena, but I didn't marry her and then struggle with doubt. But I went through this profound period of doubt in my life where I was really doubting God's goodness. It was a pretty difficult time where I was wondering, is God good? Is the gospel good news? And I was really struggling deeply with the idea of how many people don't know the Lord, what that means for them, and whether the gospel is good news and whether God is good. And I went to seminary struggling with that doubt. I was wrestling with that through some of my time in seminary, just really asking the Lord about those doubts and taking them before the Lord. And the book of Job, along with Romans 9, were really important for me in my journey to understand the relationship between how broken the world can be and who our God is. And the brokenness that exists in the world and who our God is. See, this question, when we can look at, and things can get really bad, it's a profound question that causes many people to leave the faith. Many people leave the faith when they look at the world, they see how it's broken, and then they look at God and they say, where are you? And they might echo a lot, and some of you, even in this room, might be struggling with some of those profound questions right now. You see this profound brokenness in your life, or something that's not working the way it's supposed to, or something, some frustration, you lose a job, you go through a financial crisis, whatever might be going on in your life, and you might find yourself in the place of the disciples crying out. And I think that the word that really stood out to me in the gospel reading was those words, Lord, do you not care that we are perishing? Might we find ourselves asking that sometimes? Lord, do you not care that we are perishing? Because the Gospel of Mark, it doesn't let Jesus off the hook. Like, he could have avoided the storm had he wanted to. The very next passage that we read was this demon-possessed man who was so in power, or so indwelt by demons and so demonized that he was breaking through shackles and all that was going on. Mark spends a lot of detail on how bad this guy's life is, right? And then what is happening, the repeated word in the gospel refrain is begged. All of a sudden, when Jesus just shows up on the scene, those powerful demons are reduced to begging. They begged Jesus not to send them out of the country. They begged Jesus to send them into the pigs. They were all of a sudden, they were so powerful, and they're just begging Jesus. So Mark doesn't leave us in doubt to whether God has the authority, or Jesus had the authority to fix what is broken in the world. He doesn't leave us in doubt to that, does he? And yet, there they are in the storm, and they're wondering, why is Jesus sleeping, and does he care? And when we look at the brokenness in the world in our lives, God is able right now to take it away. And he doesn't. And that's hard for us, right? And the book of Job is really all about that. So we're going to do a quick summary of the book of Job, because we come in on the very end of the story here. So quick summary of the book of Job, tell you what's going on, and then we'll talk about a couple lessons we learn from that, and how the real answer to the problem of how broken things are in the world is not some intellectual platitude, but in the cross of Jesus today. So we have this Job. He's a righteous man. He's afflicted to prove that his faithfulness is not tied to circumstances. So the very beginning of the book of Job opens up, and it says, like, Job was he had all these possessions. He was righteous. There's this man from Uz. His name is Job. He's like so righteous. He's like idealized for his righteousness, but he's also obscenely wealthy. When you read about all his cattle and stuff, we might not be reading it right, but we should read it like he owned like 3 yachts, and he had special vacation homes, and he was obscenely wealthy. He was a very wealthy man, and also a very righteous man. So this is the person that we're presented. This is the character of Job, this righteous, wealthy man. Okay, that's all we're really supposed to know about him, right? And he's terribly afflicted twice, but there's a reason for the affliction, and the reader knows about it, and no one else in the story does. And there's this divine counsel between an accuser and God, right? And he says, he's not right. He's not righteous because he loves you. He's not faithful because he loves you. It's because he's obscenely wealthy. Look at him. He's got everything, right? Of course he's faithful. But if we take away all that, he wouldn't be faithful to you. And so his affliction is meant to prove that his righteousness is not based on circumstances, right? There was a show that came out that just the title, it was like several years ago. Just the title might want to make us all take a shower, but it was called Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire? Do you remember when that show came out? Right? And it's like, ugh, what a stupid show. Like, don't watch the show. But I mean, goodness, really? Like, we've come to that, like we're competing to marry the millionaire. But the reason we know that show is awful is because we know that's not love, and that's not how marriage works, right? That you don't the primary criteria for who you marry shouldn't be whether they're a millionaire, right? That shouldn't be up on the top of the list for the people that you choose to marry, right? And so we know that because we know that's not love. And what's happening here is the accuser is saying, hey, it's like that. Job is righteous because of what he gets from you, but take away that and it'll go away. But again, we're the only ones that know that. It's why Job is one of my favorite books of the Bible. But it's actually very difficult to read through in the daily office liturgically. Because what's going to happen when you read through it liturgically is you're going to read all Job's friends attempting to make sense of what has happened, and they're wrong. But what they're saying sounds right because it makes sense. Because they're within their worldview, attempting to make sense of what has happened, and they weren't privy to divine counsel. So like 90% of what you read in Job is wrong. Now, it's not wrong in the sense, I'm not saying the Bible's not true. I'm saying it's wrong and that the characters in the story are saying wrong things at that moment when you're reading through it, but it sounds right, which makes it really hard to read liturgically, right? It makes it a real challenge for us. So what happens is you have Job, and everyone in the story, Job assumes God's in control of everything. God could keep me from this affliction if he wanted to. So he affirms God's control. He does it all over in the book of Job. And he also knows I've been righteous. I haven't, look, he probably doesn't believe he's perfect, that he's never made a mistake in his life, but I've been righteous. And so he starts to wonder about God's fairness. That's what Job begins to question. I've been righteous. God could stop this if he did. God's in charge of his world, and yet I'm suffering like this. Maybe God's not fair. So he says, it's all one. He destroys the blameless and the wicked. When disaster brings sudden death, he mocks the calamity of the innocent. Job beginning to struggle with, how can this be if I've been righteous? And Job's friends, they're wrestling with the same thing, and they're agreeing that God is Job's afflictor, that he's in charge of the world, that that everything that happens is under his control. But they also assume God's fairness. So what they do is question Job's righteousness, right? They start saying, does the God pervert justice? Or does the Almighty pervert the right? Because they know God is fair, they start to wonder about Job's righteousness, and they do this in statements that are like dripping with irony. Because again, we know about the divine counsel and they don't. So they say, like in 22 verse 4, is it for your fear of him that he reproves you and enters into judgment with you? Now we know the answer to that question is yes. It's because he's been righteous that he's being afflicted, and it's to prove that his righteousness is not based on circumstances. But they're asking that question sarcastically, saying, oh, is it because you're so righteous that you have to go through this, Job? But the fact is, yes, it's because he's so righteous that he has to go through this. And it's to prove that his righteousness is not based on his circumstances. We got a real mess here. We've got a righteous guy who's perfectly innocent, a God who's perfectly in control of his world, and all of a sudden this guy is being afflicted because of some bet with an accuser, right? To prove that he'll be righteous, not based on his circumstances. That's what this story says. And now God's going to show up. And maybe some of us are excited. We're like, God, answer for yourself. And the passage we read today is God's answer. It's not an answer that we like, is it? He maintains that Job is righteous. Says, Job, you've been righteous. This isn't like because you deserve it. But what he does is he argues for his complete and utter freedom over his creation. Were you there when I made the world, he said. Were you there, Job? It gets so sarcastic that by the end of our reading today, he's in an alligator making contest. You know, have you ever made an alligator, Job? I made an alligator. Did you make an alligator? You know, and so he's very clearly saying, I am God, you are not. And understand, God never gives the answer to the question in the whole book. He never says, here's why I did it, Job. The end of the book ends, Job still doesn't know about the divine counsel where there was an accuser that says he's only righteous based on circumstances. He still doesn't know about it at the end of the book. And God argues for his complete freedom over his creation. Psalm 115, which we read always every month in the daily office, right? Verse 3 says, our God is in heaven. He does what he pleases. Not a message we like. We'd like to say, no, God should act in such a way that his justice is obvious or apparent to me. But he won't play the game. And he displays the limits of human reason and our inability to understand what he's doing. So, what are two lessons we can learn from this in our wrestling with Job and his friends today? First, God's goodness is absolutely independent of our assessment of him. And it's displayed fully in the cross of Christ. See, neither Job and his friends ever got the answer of why this happened to Job. The reader didn't get the answer as far as God explaining to himself why this is a good God thing to do, right? No one gets the answer at the end of the story. But at the end, they learned that God has ultimate authority and that he does what he pleases, and that's all they learned. I want you to settle something in your mind today. If you think about the problem of evil or the brokenness in the world, all sorts of really terrible things are going to happen in our world, and they make no sense to us. The world is really broken and really ravaged by sin. The world is terribly unfair. Resources are distributed inequitably. Tonight, thousands of children will die of starvation, and I will have to limit my caloric intake to try to not get any fatter. That's not fair. It's broken. It's not right. But I want you to actually go ahead, look at your neighbor, look them right in the eye, and I want you to say 3 words. Say, I don't know. Yeah, do it. Do it. I know it's hard. Say, I don't know. I don't know. And that felt good, didn't it? Didn't it feel good to say, I don't know? Yeah, it's something we got to learn to say a lot if we're going to follow Jesus. If we're going to follow Jesus, we need to learn how to say, I don't know. Because what happens is calamities happen, and Christian talking heads sometimes get to talking like they do know when the answer is they don't know, and they start sounding a lot like Job's friends who are explaining why this must have happened, but they have no idea what happened. We just walked through a global pandemic. Why did a global pandemic happen? I don't know. Right? Right. I don't know. I don't know why in a world run by a perfectly capable and powerful God and a perfectly good God, I don't know why some of these things are allowed to happen. I don't know. Okay, we got enough. I don't know. I don't know. The world is broken, and I don't have all the answers, and God has the answers, but he's not always telling. Some of you are going through things that are really difficult right now that you're not even opening them up and telling other people about yet. Someone has hurt you. You're in financial peril. You've been abused emotionally or physically. And you're wondering, how could God have let this happen? You're shouting that at me. But Father James, what happened with me was so wrong and so wicked and so broken. How could this have been? And I want to tell you all the answers. But I'll tell you what I do know. God isn't indifferent. He's not indifferent from our suffering. He isn't distant from your pain. And he entered directly into the worst injustice possible in the world, and he received all of it onto his body in the person of his son, Jesus Christ. All of it, all the brokenness, all the unjust religious and political systems, all that is messed up and not fixed in the world. He took it all upon himself, and he took it on his body on the cross. He's experienced the worst of it. We don't know why he's allowed it. We know something about God deciding in his goodness that a world with freedom and the brokenness that comes with freedom is maybe better than a world where he didn't allow for that. But again, we don't know why he allows what he allows in the world. But what we do know is that he's not indifferent and that he's taken it upon himself. The answer to the problem of evil, the problem that the book of Job deals with, is not found in an intellectual platitude. It's found at the cross of Jesus, where he's willing to take all of it upon himself. Where is God in the midst of what I'm going through? He's the one who sent his son. He's the one who stretched out his arms upon the hardwood of the cross, that all might come within the reach of his saving embrace. He's the one suspended there, suffering and dying. He's the one offered to us in the breaking of the bread and the drinking of the wine. He goes far beyond an intellectual answer for the pain. He takes the pain on himself. Second lesson we learn is that in the deeply painful trials, and particularly the ones that we can't explain, this is where true faith in God is both displayed and built. Where true faith in God is both displayed and built in those times. Although Job and the friends don't know the reason Job suffered, we do, right? We know what happened. We know the question that was laid out in the book of Job about the divine counsel, about deciding whether or not Job's righteousness was based on circumstances. But we know the people in our lives that we can look at and we can say, well, yeah, of course they're faithful. You know, they have this beautiful family and they have this nice house. They have a good job. They make plenty of money. They eat enough. Of course they're faithful, right? We all know people in our lives that look perfect. Well, we're scrolling social media and all their pictures just look so beautiful and their lives look so great. And we compare their idealized life to our own and we say, well, no wonder they're faithful because there's nothing wrong in their life, right? And they're annoying. Those people are annoying, aren't they? Right? Right? And so, but it's in the trial and it's in the hardship and it's in the pain where true loyalty to God is both displayed and built, where we can display that it's not based on circumstances, but based on my love for God, and I'm going to remain faithful to God. It's in those times where we can't explain why things are the way they are, that we have opportunity to display true faithfulness to God and to build true faithfulness to God. See, so Job displays his faithfulness. And perhaps this is like the most important point of Job. The truth is, all of us are going to have experiences like Job. All of us are going to have things happen that seem senseless. And the question will be, do you adore God? Have you come to love God? Or do you love the gifts that you've received from him more than him? Are you able to join with Job and say, the Lord is given and the Lord is taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Or are you not? His faith is displayed, but it's also built. He grows in his faith through the trial, right? So by the end, he says, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And I guess I'm wondering, is if what it takes for you to see the Lord is calamity, are you willing? Maybe not. I mean, maybe not. But for him, he was able to realize that this journey he went through made it so what he'd heard, now he sees. And he's seen the Lord face to face. See, just like the disciples in the boat who said, do you care that we're perishing? And then by the end, they were marveling that even the wind and the seas obey him. Job has seen God. And he has seen that I didn't get an answer to every question I have, but I got God. So I guess today, one important thing to remember is that God doesn't answer to us. His goodness isn't open for our evaluation. He's not up in heaven wondering what you and I think of him. He's not. Our evaluation of him is not concerning to him, right? He doesn't need approval for what happens in our lives and in our world, and he isn't seeking it. But maybe more importantly than that, let's meditate on who God is. Meditate on his amazing love for us. This is the real way of sustenance through the trial. Our only hope in being faithful when the inexplicable things happen is to fall in love with God, to look to Jesus, the God who took this on himself. Today, look at the nail-scarred hands of Jesus. Receive the body broken for you. Drink the blood shed for you. And remember, and resolve to always remember, this is the God who is. And this is the God who is with us and united with us in the trials and in the storms. Amen.